If you want to be more effective in your work and in your life, and you'd like to have more confidence that you're meeting your intentions, this is where it begins. Welcome to Do Busy Right, helping you organize your information and manage your attention so that they work for you, not against you. We educate you and encourage you by discussing ways to be more effective, not more exhausted. Let's do busy right. On today's episode, I want us to think about the fact that just because your phone is mobile doesn't mean that your calls should be. On this episode of the Do Busy Right podcast, we're going to talk about the challenge of mobile calls. We're going to distinguish between having a cell phone and having a mobile call. We're going to talk about the specific challenges of a mobile phone. We're going to talk about the purpose of using a phone for business and making calls. And we're going to see about what the appropriate way is to handle that. When I was in high school, we had landline phones, as many of you may have, or maybe I'm older. And there was a particular phone station, and it was kind of in the corner of the kitchen. There was a little desk there. Sometimes there was a chair, sometimes there wasn't. And the phone's hanging on the wall with a big handset. This particular phone had a really long stretched out cord because we didn't want other people overhearing our important calls. But right next to the phone, attached to the wall, was a yellow wooden device that my granddad had made. And it had a roll of adding machine tape. So I'm putting artifacts on top of artifacts here, but it had a roll of adding machine tape in such a way that you pull it down, and it had a little thing where you could tear it off at the bottom. And so what you would do is you would write on the piece of paper, and then you pull it down and tear it off, and then you had a note there. And it was right by the telephone, so that if it was an important call and we needed to record the information, then we could do that easily. And it was very useful because if I'm calling a friend of mine whose girlfriend has the phone number of a girl I want to call, then I need to write that phone number down. And so it was a beautiful little device, single purpose. It was hand painted. And so we would use that from time to time just to take a quick note. But we had prepared to record information from an important telephone call. And when I was in high school, believe me, getting girls' phone numbers was one of the more important tasks of my life. So now, fast forward a few decades, and we've got mobile phones. And so we're not tied to standing there in the corner or stretching out our landline phone cords. And we face particular challenges then of mobile calls. And so the first thing I kind of want to think about is to distinguish between using a cell phone and having a mobile call. If this is the only kind of phone you can really get anymore. And that's fine, very convenient, nice to have. We keep it on us. In fact, keep it on us for a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with voice calls. But when we think about a mobile phone versus a mobile call is one maybe you answer in your car, or maybe you answer while you're at a kid's game. Hopefully you don't answer it in the movie theater or while you're interacting with your loved ones, but some people do that as well. The challenge of that is that we take phone calls in contexts where we're not well able to take care of the purpose of the phone call. We're tempted to try and gather information when we're not prepared to do so. And of course, the standard issue problematic phone call is while you're driving, and cars now have all the devices that you need to be able to take that call. But we've got to understand the purpose of a business phone call. If it's your daughter calling and you're just chit-chatting, that's one thing. But if it's a client calling, so the question is, should you or should you not take the phone call? So if we think about the purpose of the business phone call, we're either trying to send information or we're trying to receive information, or sometimes both. And if we're not in a good position to deal effectively with that information, to capture that information well, then what happens? Well, as you may be familiar with from these podcasts, we try to store it in our brains, okay? And our brains are bad for storing information. And the more precise that information is, the worse our brains are at storing it. So if the phone rings and it's a client, our instinct is to jump on and give, quote, good customer service, unquote. But what amounts to good customer service in this context? So by answering the phone call, you're committing to receive the information. And if you're committing to receive the information, then you're committing to dealing with it effectively. So if, say, one of my clients is a realtor, and so a call comes in and it's a client, so he wants to give good customer service, so he answers the call in real time. And the client is wanting to make appointments to go visit 3 houses this afternoon. So having answered the phone call, my client is now committed to dealing with this information well, okay? It's very difficult to answer the call and say, oh, this is a complicated call, I'm going to hang up. If you'd call back and leave me a voicemail, or, oh, if you'd send me this information via email, right? That's a challenge. So I want to help you make sure that you're ready to receive this information, because, the worst is having to call the client back and say, oh, you told me, but I forgot. Well, no, the worst is trying to guess and getting it wrong and being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or taking them to a house that they didn't want to see. And at the bottom, at the real core thing that happens is, either way, whether you forget it or whether you have to ask again, it means you weren't listening to your customer the first time. It means that the information they're giving you was not important enough for you to stop and take care of the situation. So ideally, if we're going to take the call, then we're going to put ourselves in a position where we're able to record the information. And it sounds like it's something you don't want to do, okay? You pull off on the side of the road and you actually listen to the phone call and you actually capture the information. You're capable of doing that, which means you have pen and paper there in your car with you, right? And that way you can take down these addresses of houses people may want to go see, or you can take down the invoice number and the amount that your customer is calling you about, or you can take down details of phone numbers for where your next meeting is going to take place. And so I'm not arguing whether or not it's moral to take calls while you're driving or in any other mobile circumstance. I'm arguing whether or not it's effective. So if you're prepared to do it, great. Pull over into a parking lot, park the car, take the call, take the information, take the piece of paper and put it in your pocket so you don't forget that you have a piece of paper. Get going again. But if you're not able to take the call, then what do you do? Well, we want to always prepare for these scenarios. So if you can't record the information, don't take the call. People are very adept at leaving voicemail or calling you back. One of the phrases that I've recalled from several things that I've read is, human communication is highly fault tolerant. And what that means, of course, is that if people don't get you, they will try back. So either they'll leave a voicemail or they'll call you back. I would argue that the best scenario is that they actually leave you a detailed voicemail. Okay. So you got to think in advance and prepare for this. And if you're going to get them to leave you a detailed voicemail, then you want to make it as easy for them as possible. So that means that you have to prepare your voicemail system. So a couple of ideas around that in terms of making it easy for them. So you got to work on your voicemail system. You got to learn how to deal with it effectively. Okay. And I'm talking about things like you don't want to have a long prompt. There was a time when voicemail or recording messages was new to people and they didn't know what to do. And so you do something cutesy and say, oh, leave me a message after the beep. Well, that's no longer necessary to tell people. So when you're thinking about your voicemail prompt, keep it as short as possible. I will say that you do want to say your name, because the last thing I want to do is, if I'm making a call to a number that I have never used before, is hear a voicemail that says, you've reached blah, 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 blah. Because I don't know if that's the right number. So if I'm going to get your voicemail, I'd like to hear your name. And that gives me more confidence that I've completed the delivery of this information. Don't, if you can possibly avoid it, don't make people press buttons. Okay. We've all talked about it. It's a joke of how many buttons you need to press in order to get a hold of your banker when you call the branch. And so work with your voicemail system to avoid that. If anything, the best goal is for them not to have to press a button at all. Try to get rid of all of the mechanical voice, right? So sometimes I get voicemail systems and it'll say, hey, you've reached Joe Smith. And then the mechanical voice will come on and go, to leave a callback number, press 5. Well, I don't want to leave a callback number. I want to leave a voicemail. So try to work for ways to get rid of that. I'm sure it's doable. But reassure them that it's you that they've reached. Try to make the prompt as short as possible and recognize that nobody needs voicemail instructions anymore. One thing that I do hear a lot is, your call is very important to me, so please leave a message. You may or may not want to do that. It lengthens the prompt and slows people down for while they're trying to leave you a message. And quite frankly, if their call was that important to you, then you probably would have picked up the phone. So it's a little disingenuous, but be brief, be to the point. Hey, you've reached Larry Tribble, leave me a message. And that way it's easy for people to leave you a message. And the more that it's easy for them, the more likely they are to do it. So step one is, if you're going to not answer the phone, make it easy for people to leave you information. Step two is make it easy on you to receive that information. In particular, you may want to work with your voicemail system to see if you can get a transcript of that voicemail rather than having to listen to it. Now, transcript services differ. They've gotten a lot better, but they differ in terms of how they're able to transcribe complex information. And they do things like get names wrong and that sort of thing. But ideally, you would get a good transcript of the call, because a transcript is faster to deal with, and it already includes the typed out information. So keep that in mind. And also, you'll want to make it a habit to check voicemail, particularly if you've been out for a while and you come back home and you set the phone down on your desk. Make it a habit to look into it and see about those voicemails. So I hear you. I hear people out there saying, but Larry, if they don't leave me a voicemail, I'm afraid they won't call me back. Well, you always run that risk. But here's the truth. If people call you and they have a weak purpose, they don't have a strong reason to call you, they don't have a reason that's important to them, that's the only time that they're going to not call you back. So customers that want to work with you will call you back. Now, will they call you back 5 times? No, they probably won't. But they will call back, or they'll leave a message. And so, but if they don't, I always assume that if somebody rings my phone and will not leave me a message, an unknown number calls my phone and they won't leave me a message, then their purpose for calling me just wasn't all that important. Or they don't want me to know who they are, which means they're probably a spam call. So just think, if it's not important enough to the caller to reach you, then is this somebody that you want to chase down? Your mileage may vary on this. But if you're actually trying to use the call for its intended purpose, that is the exchange of information, then you got to be prepared to take that information. And so now there are many people who have inbound prospect calls, who have a customer service number that they have to answer. People in the services and trades need to be available to their clients. And I understand that and agree with it. But if it's actually that important to you, then you probably want to consider setting up a specific service for doing that. Maybe it's a different phone number than your personal number, one that gets dealt with by a human person. We tended to fire all the receptionists when voicemail happened, but there's still a place for that in the world. And so you'll want to set up a specific process to deal with those kinds of customer service calls. So just want you to think about it and think it through. And the question in your mind that I want to leave you with is, if you can't pay attention to a call, are you doing anybody a service by taking the call? So as you work through your system for dealing with these sorts of things, have that thought in your mind. If you agree that these are things that need your attention, then you'll want to make sure that you're both ready to take the information and in a position to do so, right? And recognize that human communication is highly fault tolerant. And if people really want to get in touch with you, that they'll do a little bit of work to do so. And don't imagine that they're going to flip through the phone book and then call the next, I don't know what your service is, plumber. So have some confidence around this thing and recognize that if people have a weak purpose for trying to get in touch with you, then it might not be in your best interest to talk to them, right? So, and then finally recognize that trying to do the purpose of the phone call, the purpose of the phone call is receiving or sending information. Trying to do that when you can't focus on the task is going to produce errors in your life. So the next time you're in the car and the phone rings, stop and think, who is it? Do I need information from them? And if so, how best can I get it? And then think about, okay, let's pull over on the side of the road. Let's organize a piece of paper and a pencil, and let's get this information captured effectively. And then we can move on with the rest of our day, knowing that we've actually done good work for our customers. I hope that you found this provocative in thinking about how you manage this very specific part of your information chain. At Do Busy Right, we're always thinking about how best to capture and manage information. And we do that so it doesn't stay stuck in our skulls where it's not as useful as most people think it is. Look for more episodes on the Do Busy Right podcast of how to manage your day-to-day information in ways that serve you, that make you more effective and less exhausted.